Hello and welcome to another episode of the Human Guinea Pig Project. Today I'm here with a good friend of mine, Dr. Elena Gross, and she's a migraine expert, so we're going to talk about migraines. Elena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. One of my favorite ketonians ever, for sure, and such a smart brain, so I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. And we probably have a few shared genes as well, considering you have epilepsy and I have migraines.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities between epilepsy and migraines. But I guess going back further, could you just explain who you are and what your background is before we delve into the juicy stuff?
Definitely. So, well, I used to have migraines since, say, 15 years, almost 2 decades, actually. I started with when it was around 14, 15, where a medical doctor or a hormone specialist, a current specialist, prescribed me the contraceptive pill for estrogen lack. It didn't even have real estrogen in there. So it probably made so many things so much worse, but she didn't know better. And half a year after starting those, I had these debilitating headaches that I've never had before. And for about a year, nobody could figure out what they are and why they're happening. And I was sent to psychologists and brain scans, and they were checking for tumors and everything. And half-sided, it was, now this seems so straightforward. This is a migraine. But in the end, we had to self-diagnose asking Dr. Google. And my mom remembered that her mother had these headaches as well. And then we had migraine diagnosis later then confirmed by a special neurology clinic or specialized migraine clinic. But basically, from then onwards, it was a quest to find out what are migraines, what can you do about them. My parents spend a big chunk of their savings on things like acupuncture, alternative, any approach on the drug and the non-drug side we tried, but it only got worse. And the most frustrating was even that wherever you went, nobody could really give you an explanation as to what migraines are and why they're happening. And so I decided when my migraines finally turned chronic, which means I was in pain about 20 out of 30 days, and you can only take acute medication on, say, 10 days per month maximum to not get like liver failure, medication overuse, headache, and so on, that I realized I wouldn't be able to ever do a normal job anyway. So I switched from psychology, which I was studying back then because I was always interested in the brain and who we are, into neuroscience, and was very lucky in that a neurologist, a migraine expert at the clinic in Oxford, where you work, Andrew, took me on for both of my master's thesis, and I got to work with migraine patients, chronic migraine patients on the one side, and also these things called iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, which are basically enable us to turn a skin cell into a neuron, for example, that has the patient's genetics. So both of my projects are focused on migraine, and I learned a lot. And finally, procrastinating, as I usually do in the library, from my master's thesis, I was flicking through Nature Neurology or a Nature magazine that had an epilepsy special in there. And basically it was describing the oldest treatment for epilepsy, which is the ketogenic diet, a diet that mimics fasting. And reading about this and already knowing that migraines and epilepsy are genetically related, everything was falling into place and everything suddenly makes sense. Because I already had one patient, she's a chronic migraineur. The scanner broke down and she had to come back 2 weeks later after her first scan. And usually chronic migraineurs, they almost crawl into the lab. They look very bad often. They are in pain all the time. And she comes back and she's like walking upright. She's lost weight. She's smiling. She looks like a completely different person. And I thought, like, what the hell has she done? And she told me she was fasting and she was drinking wine every night, but she didn't have a single migraine attack for the whole duration of the 2 weeks. And for me, at the beginning, and this didn't make sense because my theory about migraine was already that it's an energy deficient state in the brain. But now she wasn't eating. And we'd learned in Oxford that glucose is the primary fuel of the brain. So how could she not have had migraines even worse? And when I stumbled across this article, everything made sense. So while she wasn't eating, her brain was fueled for the first time ever, right? Because eating calories doesn't mean that the actual energy gets to where it needs to get. So that was the big aha moment. And then just long story short, I then applied for PhDs around the world where I could look at ketosis in migraine. Oxford said this is way too risky. You would have to do neuroimaging or some kind of more boring and away from patients or solutions project if you want to stay on your stipend. And in Basel, actually, where I am based now in Switzerland, that was the only place where they said if you turn down your scholarships in Oxford, you can try this on a little side project. And eventually, with like lots of obstacles, this turned into a full PhD project and a paper that we're now currently publishing on a metabolic migraine subgroup and the potential efficacy, sorry, I'm losing my English, it's late over here, efficacy and safety of ketones in migraine prevention. I've started KetoSwiss, a startup which aims to bring metabolic, like preventative solutions to migraines and later on also other neurological disorders, bringing exogenous ketones in medical grade or high quality into the clinics primarily. And I finished my PhD in the meantime. And yeah, I've basically fixed my migraines for the most part, which is the most beautiful thing. So I've basically won no matter what happens. And that was a super long intro. So thanks for listening. And now back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you mentioned at the very beginning, medications. How effective actually are medications for migraines? Because I know for epilepsy, it's quite hit and miss. And you did mention there are some similarities, not just in etiology, but also treatment in terms of, well, I guess treatment in terms of ketogenic diets and those kinds of things, right?
Kind of treatments and how effective are they? So yeah, there is a overlap even in treatments between epilepsy and migraine. So anticonvulsant drugs can be used quite successfully in migraine. What we find, though, is on average across patients, you don't ever really see more than 20% more efficacy over placebo across patients. But this obviously may mean that in one patient, this particular treatment works like 50% more than placebo, which almost has you migraine free. But in others, it doesn't work at all. So we are, even with the new solutions, these so-called CGRP monoclonal antibodies, which are basically injection-based drugs that block the receptor of CGRP. And CGRP is a neuropeptide that hurts, but it's also expressed in the gut. So these people get constipated. But even there, in this one and only migraine-specific preventative solution, you only get on average 20% over placebo. An average placebo effect in migraine would be between 20 and 30%. So on average, these people have, let's say, 50% less pain, but it's not a huge effect. This is on a baseline typically of 10 days of migraine per month. Now they get 2 less days on this treatment if they take the drug instead of just like water or sugar water or any placebo. And so that's not amazing, but I think the major problem also with migraine treatments are that migraine is a very complex multigenic disease. So my migraine is completely different to the migraine of your brother or whoever else it may be, right? And we don't have any biomarkers. And this is something that we're changing as well. So we found biomarkers that predict treatment success for MigraKet. And that means in our solution, the effectiveness over placebo in the responders is 60% over placebo. So that's 3 times better than anything else. And I think one of the reasons is that we have a subgroup of migraine where this really works and we have biomarkers for that specific solution. And it could be that something like this is also true for anticonvulsants that maybe primarily work by reducing hyperexcitability in the migraine brain. If you had biomarkers, they may be more successful in a subgroup also.
So could this product, MigraKet, could that also be potentially effective for treating epilepsy?
It's a very good question, and I only have anecdotal data here. I've talked to a parent who's taking exogenous ketones or buying exogenous ketones for his son since birth. So he's almost since birth. He was like half a year to a year old, and he's now been taking them for 4 years. He hasn't had a single seizure in 4 years. Apart from one time when they were going on holiday and they couldn't take the ketones on holiday. And that was when he seizured almost immediately. So that's just anecdotal data, but we know that the ketogenic diet is working pretty well for epilepsy, and it's working pretty well for migraines as well. There's 3 randomized controlled trials now doing the diet or dietary approaches in migraine. But you know that this has to be very strict in a neurological setting for the body to even make any ketones. If your liver is very taxed, as in migraine with medication overuse for decades, levels are oftentimes not very high. Then there's the compliance issue. You're the one of the people that I admire the most with regards to how much you actually can do and how much willpower you have and how strict you can go with anything you put your mind to it. You'll just do it, period. But I'm, for example, not like that. For me, it's very hard to adhere to anything that is very strict in a dietary sense, because I just love eating and cooking and social activities. And also with a business, I don't want to be too picky when I'm eating out in a restaurant or whatever, because it's maybe frowned upon a little bit, and I have to have these people like me because they have to invest in the business or whatever, right? So there's so many restrictions. And I really think that in children, especially adults that do not have as much support or as much willpower, this could be really good alternatives or add-ons to say a low GI or a low carb diet. So I'm doing a low carb diet right now, which has like maybe 70 grams of carbs a day, only coming from like fruit and colorful vegetables and that kind of stuff, bit of honey, maybe a bit of yogurt. And that's something I can adhere to very easily, and that feels best for me. But then I don't have to anymore. I don't have to be in ketosis anymore after like 2.5 years, which is also what we see in epilepsy, interestingly. But now, like, just for a top up, I just drink my ketones exogenously sometimes. So this would be peach and passion fruit flavor, and it tastes good, and I like how it makes me feel, and that seems to be a good solution for me. It may not be for everyone, but I'm really hoping. My ex-supervisor in Basel is currently applying for a grant, and I really think this should be looked at in children with epilepsy, potentially using our biomarkers that suggest a metabolic and inflammatory involvement in specific types of epilepsy. As you know, not everybody's responding to a ketogenic diet either in epilepsy, right? It's a hit and miss thing. And maybe it doesn't have to be hit and miss, because maybe we can predict who is responding very well and who isn't. And that's something we could look at as well, and especially in children. I mean, all these, I've taken topiramate, which is an anticonvulsant drug. So I can only say that it was a nightmare. I lost my memory. I had dementia. I was losing my words. It was, you wake up, you're completely disoriented. I mean, there's so many side effects that you don't want. So you're making yourself better and making yourself worse at the same time. So something natural or human identical like ketone bodies could really be a good alternative.
Yeah, with your own story, what do you feel has been the most effective aspects of your diet and lifestyle that you've implemented to have the success that you've had with the cessation of the migraine attacks you experienced?
That's an excellent question. And I think it's not such a simple answer. So you can't just say I added ketones or I went low carb and that's it. So what I would probably say, it's like a 4-step approach that most people should be implementing, and that will probably work for a lot of people in improving their migraines. Now, the first part I think that everybody should be doing, irrespective of whether they're in full-blown ketosis or not, is stabilizing blood glucose levels. So this means your diet must be some kind of a low GI diet. Otherwise, you will not get the full benefit, and it's just best for longevity and overall health. So go on a low GI diet, cut out the crap, cut out all the sugar and the fried seed oils and the simple starches like white flour and that kind of stuff. So that's the base. Second is, you need enough micronutrients for your mitochondria, your powerhouse of the cells, to work. Now, this is a prerequisite for making enough energy in your brain and to prevent migraines as well. So that means either you check your blood levels and you see whether all your minerals, trace minerals, fat and water soluble vitamins are spot on, or whether you have deficiencies. If you do have deficiencies, if you know your levels, you can do a targeted approach and supplement those. If you don't have the money or resources to do the testing, then I would definitely make sure you're on a very high quality diet that includes lots of mineral and micronutrient density, or supplement or just supplement with a very high quality multivitamin. I have one that is from Life Extension that has every single substance, I think, in it that you may wish for. It also comes at a price, but I think it's like 80 different substances and nothing is overdosed. So I think that's something that you can safely add on to your current diet. The second step then, or third step now, is also crucially important and especially important for migraine, but I think also epilepsy, and I can't stress how important this is. You need to get stress out of your life. And with stress, I don't only mean psychological stress, I also mean chemical and physical stress. So that means high intensity interval training is probably not going to be for you if you have migraines. Test it out, but it probably makes more free radicals than you can catch. Then get rid of any processed foods because they induce chemical stress in the form of oxidative stress, free radicals, these small particles that damage your DNA and damage your mitochondria and basically destroy everything they touch. The other thing is chemicals. Now, you would not believe how many chemicals are in our day-to-day products. This is skin products, hair products, just hygiene products. This can be cleaning products that are completely toxic for you. This could also just be preservatives that are in your foods, or even if you are not eating organic, or this could be, a form of arsenic, conservatives in pesticides, herbicides, and so on. So all of these stressors accumulate, these chemical stressors accumulate in your body, and they will increase oxidative stress, which again will damage your mitochondria. And you are needing your mitochondria, whether you're burning lactate, glucose, or ketones, your mitochondria are needed in a good state in order to even burn that energy. So that's a bit like you can put the right fuel in your gas tank. Even if you're doing that, if your engine isn't working properly, right, you will not be able to burn the fuel, even if it's the right one. Now, make sure that all the stresses, the oxidants are reduced and antioxidants are increased. Now, increasing antioxidants, for example, is done by eating a whole foods diet, having all these, if you are eating vegetables, colorful vegetables around. If you're not eating vegetables, then having some of organic liver and that stuff to make sure you get everything you want. High quality water, that's also included because there's so much toxins in tap water, especially in the US. A high quality mineral water. In Switzerland, I'm very lucky. I get glass bottles of like the best mineralized, super high mineral water here, but you can find it elsewhere too, that you get some of the mineral non-contaminated waters. That's also important. And the last factor in that third step is air quality. Now, I live in Basel. It's a small city, but it's still like cars and cars going by my window. So I have a little air purifier. I don't use it enough. But if you're living in a big city, this is also a very important point. And then plants. Plants are beautiful and they're making oxygen for you and they can detoxify compounds from the air. So putting plants in your apartment makes for better room quality and possibly also detoxifies your air almost for free. Now, the last step you're probably all been waiting for is the addition of ketones or ketosis as a different fuel source for the brain. Now, if you've come to this step and you have a beautiful diet and all of this, your glucose is stable, you have all the micronutrients you need, you've gotten rid of chemical, physical, and social stress, then, and you still get migraines all the time, then you may have to offer your brain an alternative fuel source. And this could be lactate, but we don't have much experience with lactate, but it can also be ketone buddies. Ketone buddies, we know it's safe. For years, even supplementation is very likely to be safe. Our safety biomarkers in the study actually are improving rather than getting worse. There's chronic feeding studies with exogenous ketones in mice that are living as long or longer than the non-keto mice, right? Even exogenous ketones. Now, I already mentioned this could be two steps. If you're doing well with cutting fruit out and vegetables out and you're feeling good on a high quality, real food ketogenic diet, you get your ketones this way and your liver can handle it. By all means, that comes almost for free. Do that and see if your migraines drop then. If you're finding you're really struggling here, and especially at the transition period where you don't have ketosis yet because your liver doesn't know how to make them, and you are not eating glucose anymore, especially in those first 2 weeks, I would strongly recommend, if you can, adding exogenous ketones to make it easier and not have like the worst migraines for 10 days straight, which I had. So that when I went on a fast to help transitioning into this period, it literally was the worst pain migraines in my life. And exogenous ketones weren't really available. So I really think that can make your life much easier in the transition period. And then you can experiment. If it helps you adding those here and there and you have the funds, you can. If not, a ketogenic diet that is adhered to, if you're actually doing it, seems to work almost as well, or maybe even better. So 4 steps: stabilizing blood glucose, making sure micronutrients, everything your mitochondria needs are in place. A 3rd step, getting rid of oxidative stress and increasing antioxidants. 4th step, getting into ketosis, one way or another.
You mentioned micronutrients. Are there any specific micronutrients that you can list that would be particularly useful for migraineurs, I think the term is?
Yeah, it's great you're saying that, because one of the top number 1 things I would always recommend to take is actually not really a micronutrient, but a hormone. So that falls more into the antioxidant category. I think melatonin is a wonderful thing to take. Melatonin is actually called the sleep hormone. You may have heard of it if you are in sleep trouble, but it actually acts in the mitochondria, and it can be a very potent antioxidant in the mitochondria, and it can improve your sleep. So I'm taking it in super high doses, and if I get a migraine coming and I take it even in higher doses with just something benign like an aspirin or something, that can take the migraine away sometimes. So adding melatonin, I think, is great. Then the other thing that is important in migraine actually is having your sodium levels in a good space. So some people, if they have a migraine coming acutely, they take a bit of sodium, like a Himalayan salt, and that helps too. Then magnesium is one thing to watch. Then there have been studies with CoQ10. CoQ10, again, is an antioxidant that has been shown efficacy in migraine if it's high dosed. I would choose ubiquinol, not ubiquinone, which is the inactive version. Ubiquinol is the reduced version which you want. And you must always take that with fat. So otherwise it's very poorly absorbed. And then the B vitamins. B2 has been looked at especially, but I guess B vitamins across the board cannot harm in migraine. That's something to look out for. And then just minerals in general, minerals and electrolytes. If you can get a high quality electrolyte without sugar, that's amazing too for migraines, I would say.
I find it can be quite difficult with supplements, identifying what are quality supplements that don't have fillers, that have some sort of sugar or some ingredient that might antagonize the effect that you actually want to have. What are the things that people may want to avoid when looking for supplements?
It's an excellent question, and I've only been really digging deep into this topic myself when I was designing MigraKet, which has all the trace minerals, all the B vitamins, all these vitamins and antioxidants that you want in one product. So what I realized is that there's actually different versions of vitamins that we are not aware of as a consumer usually. There's 4 different versions of B12, for example, and most cheap supplements have something called cyanocobalamin, and that's actually toxic even. And that's just the cheapest version to make. So there's 2 other versions that are much more bioavailable that you should be looking out for. That's something you should be looking out for every single ingredient. So that makes it very complicated for a layperson to do. So what I would usually recommend is there's a couple of brands that I really trust that have the highest quality ingredients in them, and they don't just make expensive pee. Because if you need to convert a non-bioactive version of a vitamin, then you need enzymes and energy to do so. And a lot of people that are already sick cannot do that very well. So then you basically have nothing gained and you just have money lost. So one product, and I don't usually want to recommend, and I don't, I'm not paid by anybody to promote anything, but if I was to talk to a friend and they ask me what supplements are you taking or what brands do you trust, I usually say Thorne Research is one. Thorne Research has usually the bioactive and very good formulations. Sometimes I also take different versions such as what's it called, Live Extension. Sometimes, not always. They also have ingredients in there sometimes that I don't like as much, like these nanoparticles, magnesium stearate. I don't know how you often call those. Silica can be a problem, don't have to be a problem depending on on their size. But Thorne Research and Pure is another supplement that I was usually taking because of it's very pure. It has very little fillers, no rice, flour, or anything else in there, and oftentimes also the bioavailable versions of vitamins. It's recently been bought by Nestle, so now I'm like, I actually don't want to support Nestle, so I would recommend Thorne Research over them. Or once it becomes available, I mean, this is like a very cheap plug, then obviously you can also buy a MigraKet, which has the things in there. You may have there's another brand in Germany that's called Nature Love that is also fine. Looking for as little ingredients as possible is usually the best way to go if you're looking for pure ingredients. Obviously, if you're looking for a very extensive multivitamin with like 50 plus ingredients, it can be hard for somebody to distinguish an active ingredient for some kind of bullshit, and they all have chemical names. So unless you want to read into all the individual substances, going for a brand that has this figured out for you may be a go-to solution. Or what would you suggest, Andrew? You have a lot of experience, maybe even more, with choosing supplements that are as pure as possible than I do.
Yeah, I do have Thorne Research supplements because I know that they've been through clinical trials.
Good point.
And they're thoroughly researched. So yeah, sometimes I even look into the trials and see just what kind of dosage they were using and what they were using it for. So yeah, that's very good. Pure encapsulations.
Yeah.
And there's another Source Naturals, I think is that I've tried. I think I had a melatonin from there, but I have a different one now. So yeah, those ones.
Yeah.
And the magnesium as well. Just what form of magnesium do you think would be best for someone who's suffering from migraines?
So what I use it's a good question. I use a mix of four very bioavailable ones. There's ones that work better in the mitochondria. There's another one that gets up and taken up better by the brain. There may be one that works better on the gut. So I have a magnesium product that actually uses all four in one. It's by Nature Love again, which is this German brand. But what else would I recommend? I mean, my colleague and maybe even friend Dominic D'Agostino, who used to be my external supervisor in the US, he has shown that magnesium BHB has a very good bioavailability. So that's the form that is used in our product currently. So beta-hydroxybutyrate is the primary ketone body of the body, and it is most stable if you bind it to minerals. So one of the ketone bodies that is in our product is actually a BHB, that ketone body bound to a magnesium. And Dominic D'Agostino in the US has shown that that is a very bioavailable form of magnesium. And so we're using that instead of using the four different versions in our product. But I currently additionally use the four different threonate, orotate, and citrate, I think, and one more for our. And I just wanted to add something because I forgot it. Now, another part that is very important in addition to micronutrients is getting your hormone levels right. We already talked about melatonin, which is a hormone. Always make sure when you go on hormone therapy to have bioidentical hormones. This is the biggest mistake I've ever done. I had a thyroid, and I still do, thyroid deficiency, right? Hypothyroidism. And I was always prescribed the chemical stuff from when I was like 14. Gave me the worst migraines ever. Like I couldn't even take an eighth of the smallest tablet and not get a migraine. Now your migraine is warning you whenever something isn't right. So definitely don't use synthetic hormones. It's the worst. But get to a bioidentical hormone specialist, nature hormone specialist, wherever you are, and check out whether you have some deficiencies, because that can also mean that your mitochondria aren't working well or you have too much oxidative stress. So my adrenals, for example, aren't working well, and now I'm supplementing with a natural adrenal cortex, which is basically just a part of the adrenal cortex from an animal that has all the stuff in there. Makes me feel a lot better. I'm also taking natural thyroid that is a pharmacy is making that for me from a pig, and that I don't have a single migraine from that, and I can dose it as much as I want. Also, my melatonin comes from pigs. Again, natural forms of melatonin without any fillers. And if I just take artificial or just a normal store-bought melatonin, I can only tolerate the smallest of doses. With this, I can go up to 40 milligrams, and I'm not telling you to do the same thing without a doctor or somebody who can really supervise you in this. But that's very high levels, and I tolerate it very well. But just with the bioidentical stuff, I just wanted to say this is also important for disease prevention: is having your hormones in optimal levels and using the real bioidentical hormones, the same hormones your glands would be making if they would make enough, and not just an artificial crappy substance that we don't know what else it's doing, and that is only doing part of the job of the real thing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking we're both very knowledgeable about these things, but some people might not know the first thing about where to go for information, what medical professionals can help them to decipher an approach that might work for them. What's the best starting point for someone who wants to learn how to, not only how to treat themselves, but how to monitor their, I guess, the situation and their progress?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's the one question I don't have a perfect answer to, because so many patients are writing me and asking where can they go, can I recommend anyone? And I can't really recommend anyone at the moment where I say this is somebody you can go to and they actually know what migraines are, and they know about these hormone issues, they know about micronutrients, they know about diet, they know about migraine. It's really hard. There's not many, if any, experts out there. So what I'm trying to do to help out is everything I've learned in like 10 years of research and own experiments is I'm writing a book on this, which will be published in summer. I'm publishing videos on a weekly basis, almost every second day, that explains everything I know on migraine on my social media, which is completely for free. I also have a few YouTube videos, and I'm going to make some more because I was asked exactly that, like ketogenic diet. Yeah, there's so much on the internet. How do you start? How do you go about all these different steps? How can you do it without money or a little money? Who can supervise you? I mean, I guess the best recommendation I could do is learn all the things I put out there, free, all the content for free. I do this, explain it as easy as possible, and then just find a trustworthy naturopath or general practitioner, anybody who's open to listening to you and just supervising you on just general blood and liver or whatever biomarkers. Anybody who can just run a lab test that you order, who can work with you like a team and monitor your progress. I think in that case, you won't find anybody who knows much about migraine or maybe even all these nutritional interventions, but you need somebody who you can trust, who will take you seriously, who will be running some labs that you wish to run and will not be frowning at you for not taking the next anti-epileptic or antidepressant drug instead of changing your way of life. And I think these people exist widely, more and more. And I don't know if there's maybe you know this, Andrew, is there any website for ketogenic practitioners or a nutritional, more like paleo-oriented or functional medicine? I mean, the best thing maybe Googling functional medicine specialists around your area. And maybe some even do like online consultations so that you don't have to drive so far. And then you tell them what you would like to have done or do with them.
Do you think that with migraines, it's a silent condition? By that, I mean, I've seen communities of people with epilepsy and other conditions that share information and have conferences. I don't recall ever seeing a migraine conference. Is that just me being ignorant, or is there a migraine community?
They do exist. They don't have much funding because people aren't dying. So it's not like people spend their savings on this, or like parents or whatever. There's limited resources. It's not very acknowledged by society. It used to be called hysteria like 10, 20 years ago. So it's only just becoming more attention. There are conferences. There's the International Headache Society, and there's a yearly big conference where like thousands of neurologists go to. There's only just recently also like a migraine summit that is online, but it's only showing like the traditional neurologists that tell you this is the migraine, you can't really get rid of it ever, it's a disease, these are the drugs you can take. They also put into the more like the mental health category sometimes. It's not yeah, there's not as much resources out there as for other conditions, considering how frequent it is. There's a few self-help groups on Facebook and stuff that have like 100,000 or so members. So that does exist. I'm also not part of them because for me, migraine has become such a little issue that I'm more into like other health forums right now. But I probably should start looking out for those more. But yeah, there are professional and unprofessional or patient communities for sure. Yeah, that does exist. Maybe not as much as in other conditions, though.
Yeah, and we've touched on it a few times, the gut-brain connection. And as we learn more about the gut microbiome, we learn that it's more and more involved in some of these neurological conditions. In terms of migraine, how does that represent itself, and what actions are these exogenous ketones having on that?
Excellent question. So we know that from epilepsy, right, that a lot of the benefits that come from a ketogenic diet are mediated partially, at least, by changes in the microbiome. And we also know that for migraine, there's a couple of studies, not all are really positive or significant, but some suggest that taking probiotics in migraine can also help. Now, you may have heard that the microbiome, which is basically all the bacteria that live in your gut, they can do so many good things for us. They can make vitamins that you need. They can also make these short fatty acids called butyrate. Now, butyrate and beta-hydroxybutyrate are fairly similar in structural length. So butyrate can also fuel the brain. So having a good microbiome is also essential for brain function. Now, we hypothesize that beta-hydroxybutyrate can also be consumed by the gut and bacteria and fuel the microbiome, and that it may also have positive impacts on the microbiome on its own. But we don't have a clinical trial to support that just yet. So that's still mostly speculation. What I do say, though, just a ketone supplement on its own will never be enough anyway. So I would also always recommend to do this, as we said, real food diet, going into a low GI, cutting out the crappy sugar diet for your microbiome and your migraine, in addition to any exogenous ketones that you may be adding. So yeah, I mean, on its own, that would not be enough for changing the microbiome, but changing the microbiome to the better seems to be migraine protective. And we know that the gut plays a key role in migraine also. For example, in children, migraine typically expresses in the gut. So they get more like nausea, they throw up more. So you think it's a gastrointestinal problem in children, but it's a migraine. And we also know, of course, that migraine is connected to nausea and sickness and throwing up as well. So it's one of the symptoms that a migraine can come with. It doesn't have to, but can. So that's an excellent question.
Also, we mentioned blood sugar, but in terms of diet, what other migraine triggers could there be? I'm thinking things like foods high in tyramine, and other foods that you might react to, maybe histamine or other things.
You just mentioned the latter, so there's quite a lot of studies that have suggested that histamine-rich food can be a problem in triggering migraine, and some migraineurs are supporting this. For example, aged cheese or red wine, or for me especially, like very old meats or fish that aren't really fresh. They can also, like in really high concentration, the histamine that is contained sometimes trigger a migraine. But that is true for some and completely untrue for others. So this can be a factor. And then there's another problem that is a very, very confounding. Now, in the premonitory phase, which is the phase that leads up to the migraine has already been triggered. But in that period, our brain senses that there's kind of a starvation going on in a lot of migraineurs. So one of the symptoms that people have is strong food cravings for something sweet and fatty to get energy levels up as quickly as possible. That leads to binge eating. And then most people just turn to whatever chocolate or something because that meets that craving that they currently have. Now, this eating chocolate may already be part of the migraine attack and a symptom of the ongoing attack. But then obviously the migraine is following and people think, oh my God, now I eat the chocolate and it's triggered the migraine. but the migraine has already been triggered and the chocolate was just a response to the migraine that is already happening. So it's really hard in that sense to decipher what is a trigger factor, really. And usually trigger factors lie back like 4 to 12 to 24 hours even of an attack. It can happen quicker with a very, very strong trigger, but usually the attack is delayed. So if you eat a chocolate and half an hour later you have a migraine, it's most likely not the trigger. It's just that you've been hungry and get this binge eating urges. And that's why you went for the chocolate. And yeah, that's something you need to consider. So diaries are important. One thing I want to mention, because I've said that toxins can be a very strong trigger factor and pro-oxidants, something that is the most potent, interestingly, for triggering migraines in myself is cooking with a free iron cast pan or getting iron infusions or using iron supplements. Now, what is super interesting is that free iron is super pro-oxidant. And if you can't buffer it, it's a very strong migraine trigger. And that can trigger a migraine, the worst migraine, within half an hour. Usually it takes longer, but that's something else to consider, that these sometimes considered healthy things, such as like an iron infusion or an iron tablet or a cast iron pan, can also have pro-oxidant properties that can trigger migraines in some people.
Iron is in a lot of multivitamins, so I suppose the multivitamin that you mentioned earlier is iron-free, and possibly even copper-free. Copper can be a problem sometimes.
Exactly, you want low copper, low iron. I don't think it's iron-free, but it's very low iron that doesn't trigger it for me. And I think it has no copper, also very low copper levels. With copper, the problem is that copper is in a lot of preservative as well, or things that are sprayed on the fields. So we don't typically have a copper lack these days. We tend to have enough copper already. You need copper, but excess copper, again, is an issue. Excess iron is an issue. With most things, interestingly, you have to be in a so-called physiological range, which means too much is a problem, too little is a problem, but you want to be in somewhat of the sweet spot.
Something else I was thinking about myself, if I don't get migraines, but I sometimes get headaches, is breathing. And I use special breathing techniques to manage my epilepsy, and if I ever get headaches, to help with that. And is there anything that you could add to that? Any strategies related to breathing that you can mention?
Yes, there's several breathing techniques that one can practice, and I can mention a few. It's very interesting you mentioned this, because high altitude can trigger migraines, and low oxygen can also be a potential connection between why weather triggers migraine, because the pressure in the air changes, oxygen concentration in the air changes, and you can be sensitive to that also. A lot of people say weather is a trigger, and that could be an explanation as to why. And we also know from cluster headache, which is related to migraine, that breathing 100% oxygen can help people in very extreme attacks. So that's one thing you can do. And I actually did this. You can buy this online on Amazon or in a pharmacy. Is these like bottles, the spray bottles that contain 100% oxygen. And my oxygen levels are super low, I think, because the substance heme that is transporting oxygen is produced in the mitochondria. And I was heavy metal poisoned, so my mitochondria are not working very well. I assume my heme concentration is low. My blood oxygen is always around 94%. That's very low. But with pure oxygen, I can get up to almost 100. There's different breathing techniques that I did with various success. So there's the Wim Hof method, where you basically are hyperventilating on 30 breaths. And then you're basically just breathing out, holding the breath for as long as you can, and then breathing in, holding the breath for a period of time. And then you repeat the cycle. And you can do the hyperventilation thing for like 3 to 5 times. You must lie down because this can be quite profound. I can usually not hold my breath for more than like 15 seconds, which is ridiculous. And you doing that, I can do like 2 minutes. But for me, I did this for a couple of months. The effect was never long lasting. Another technique I use when I'm more like anxious or my heart is beating too fast is the 4-7-8 method, which basically means you breathe in on counting to 4, hold your breath on 7 counts, breathe in slowly on 8. You do that for 4 cycles. That brings the heart rate down. And I also feel like you're a bit more oxygenated. Acute in a migraine attack, I would not know which method I would prefer. Do you have a recommendation, Andrew? What do you do if you have a headache coming? What kind of breathing are you doing?
I do more Buteyko breathing, and I also it's very interesting because what you describe is like the opposite of what you would do with epilepsy. So you wouldn't do Wim Hof with epilepsy because you can trigger a seizure doing that, and you wouldn't want to encourage any kind of hyperventilating. However, you could use those techniques that you mentioned to actually increase your seizure threshold by having a kind of a challenge, like kind of like with exercise.
Yes, I'm also not saying acutely, and in epilepsy probably never. You're absolutely right. You would do this in a preventative mode in the morning, lying down, also not hyperventilating too quickly. It's just more like a quicker breathing, not hyperventilating, but I'm just saying like in the direction of faster breathing.
Yeah.
But I've stopped doing it because I did not see a huge success on my part. I know that colleagues or others are with different problems are swearing by it. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the evidence on pure oxygen migraine is not profound. There's some studies suggest that it's good. Some studies suggest it doesn't do a difference, but there's some case studies where it helps tremendously. Again, it probably depends on whether the reason that you get a migraine is an oxygen deprivation. And what people may need to know is that if you burn certain fuel sources, including ketones also, you need oxygen to make that happen. Now, if you're constantly in a low oxygen state, like you're living in altitude and you're not breathing correctly, or you don't have the heme molecule to transport oxygen sufficiently, you will get in a hypoglycemic or in a low energy state, and that can trigger a migraine. And if basically low oxygen is the reason for your migraine, breathing 100% oxygen can mitigate the problem. If your energy deficiency is completely unrelated to anything oxygen, you can take as much oxygen as you want. It may even make things worse. I doubt it, but yeah. So, and my favorite breathing is probably the 4-7-8. I sometimes do it in bed because it's very quick. It calms you down. It doesn't make you dizzy. It can't trigger an epileptic attack or whatever. It just increases also the CO2 in your blood, which then helps the oxygen get into the cells. And it really profoundly reduces your heart rate. And this relaxation also is nice. So that's just very calmly breathe in on 4. You can count as quickly as you have to. So if you can't hold your breath for the total of this 30 seconds, just count quicker. So it can be very much adapted to your own needs. So that's something one can implement in phases where you have a headache or you feel lightheaded or your heart is racing. I think it's a good method to potentially use.
Yeah, one thing I used to do as well is to put my wrists in cold water, and that stopped me having headaches.
Yeah, cold is so good in migraine, and this is very interesting. Cold is analgesic, actually. There's these TRP receptors that cause the pain in migraine, TRP, and there's a TRPM8 receptor, a specific one, that is also responsible for pain transmission and is directly inhibited by cold. So what I do if I have a migraine, I usually put a huge ice pack. I mean, my pain usually is in the neck region here, and then in the trigeminal region here, the second arm, and around here. So I just put a huge ice pack around these regions, and it helps a lot.
This might sound like a strange question, but is there any music that you like to listen to if you have migraines? Because there's some types of music that can help. Classical music in particular.
Yeah, it's something I've never tried just because lights, smells, noises are usually not nice at all during a migraine attack. So I haven't even thought of using these kind of musics. I mean, it may help, certain frequencies may help synchronize the brain or something, right? So I've not tried, but I would be open to try it. It's an interesting thought. I've never even thought of it.
And you mentioned light as well. That's very important, isn't it? So
yeah, so something I would always recommend, and I'm not wearing it now, but I probably should, is blue light blocker glasses, essential Blue light is actually one of the most energy demanding light sources, meaning that when they get into your retina or to your eye, they require the most ATP. And they are also the most oxidant. Even if you have blue light shining on your arms or your skin, it creates oxidative stress under your skin. So blocking out blue lights, especially at night, is super important as a migraineur, and especially also when you're during the day, when you're looking at screens all the time, like I'm doing, that can help a lot. And a very easy trick for your home that is so cheap and so easy to do, I basically painted all my light bulbs yellow. Just get an acrylic warm yellow, orange paint that over these nasty white bluish light bulbs, and everybody thinks I'm crazy, but now I have warm light in my home, and if I have them on at night, I feel very relaxed, and it's very easy on my eyes as well, in addition to the blue blocker glasses.
Yeah, that's very important. That's something that has helped me a lot, particularly in the early days after my brain surgery, because I became very photophobic from that. And
yes.
I couldn't have any light. And I know that happens with people who suffer from migraines. They're very intolerant to light, particularly after an attack. So yeah, that's very important.
Before as well. And even during, to be honest, I think I have this all the time in different strengths. So after and before and during an attack, it's the strongest. But even between attacks, white and blue light just feels almost painful. It's very uncomfortable still. And if I do have to go to a meeting, and when that's there, I usually try to ask if it's during the day, if we can switch the light off, or I wear blue blocker glasses even during the day to make that neon light a little bit nicer. And the last thing is really odor. So perfumes contain a lot of toxins that we're not aware of. And because of the way that our nose and our smelling works, is there's basically no blood-brain barrier between the nose and the brain, protecting us from these airborne toxics. So perfume toxins can get directly into the brain, and they also make me feel super bad. So I can hardly tolerate being in a room with somebody with strong perfume. It makes me sick. And I've had this once that even triggers a migraine, a delayed migraine, if it's very strong and I can't get away. So that's something to also look into. And the last warning, don't put on your skin what you wouldn't put on your tongue, because a lot of the things that we put on the skin and we just don't think anything of it will actually end up in your bloodstream. And that's including perfumes.
Yeah, I think people forget that. In terms of your product, MigraKet, how do people find out more about that? Is it in clinical use at the moment, or is it still post-trial? Is it still in that period of time where you're still thinking about how best to go forward with it?
Yeah, so we're now checking the last stages of regulatory check, or whatever regulatory hurdles. And it looks like we can probably launch in the US as a medical food, which means something that is for under medical supervision, although that term is there and you can interpret that as you wish personally, for the dietary management of migraine. So we still have to have that confirmed, but that would be perfect, because then we can say migraine, we can link the evidence, we can show the biomarkers that we have. And if all goes well, we're launching in Q3 in the US first, while we're running the novel food trials and more trials that we need for the EU market entry, and also doing another clinical trial if we can get the funding for it. But yes, we will be launching in the US, and you can find us on, you can subscribe to the newsletter. We have keto.swiss is the main website, but the launch brand is called Brain Ritual. Basically, it's we aim to be the highest quality brain health brand at some point, starting with migraines, but moving into depression. We have a depression trial funded. I really believe, and maybe this is for another discussion, that there's a metabolic subgroup of depression also. So the next product could be a depression medical food, and then we're going into epilepsy also, if our collaborators get the funding, and just want to extend the product portfolio from the medical food space, from migraine to depression, epilepsy, potentially Alzheimer's. So Brain Ritual is the launch brand. That will be found on Instagram, anywhere. You can find me under Dr. Elena Gross for all the migraine related information, Brain Ritual for all the product information. and just the company updates and whatever is on keto.swiss. I think that's where you can find us and stay informed if you want to look for products that make food medicine and not some chemical entity that nobody wants to give to their enemy even.
Yeah, I was going to ask about resources, so I'm really glad that you mentioned those. We also mentioned a number of tests, and you mentioned biomarkers that you've been looking at. What would you say are the main tests that people suffering migraines can benefit from, maybe what they might want to focus on? And as a second question, what are the biomarkers that you've been looking at?
Yeah, so main tests is, I would usually, depending on budget, I would, as I already said, focus on micronutrients and vitamins and so on. Then markers of inflammation. The cheapest and easiest one is called high sensitive CRP. That's also important. Then glucose and HbA1c, the long-term glucose. Look at triglycerides as well, just getting those standard values on metabolism, glucose, fat metabolism, inflammation, I think is probably key. If you have extra budget, then a few labs in Germany, this would be Ganze Immun or BioVis, but labs around the world can already look at oxidative stress and mitochondrial functioning. So looking at markers and how damaged is your DNA, how many glycolylated proteins do you have, what's your total antioxidant capacity, how many thiol groups do you have for detoxing. These things will also tell you about your general antioxidant capacity. That's super important. If you have more money for checking genes, I would also look at your antioxidant genes, the key ones, and your phase 2 liver detox. Those genes are SOD2, superoxide dismutase 2, NAT2, and GST, glutathione S transferases, M1T1P1. Those are the genes that I would look at. And lastly, very importantly, get a complete and comprehensive hormone panel. This can best be done, I think, in your saliva. And do that with a specialist. I would look at testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, and a few others, and also looking at cortisol, melatonin, and thyroid. That's, I think, my key recommendations for what tests to run.
Yeah, I think it's a good guideline for people, because I know that when you're thinking about these things, it can be confusing with all the information out there, especially if you don't have the knowledge that we do.
Yes, and that's a lot. And I've written a book, so all of these things will also be in the book that is coming out in the next couple of months in summer, I think, hopefully summarizing and explaining this in a bit more detail. I know when you are a frequent migrainer, then all this information can be much too confusing and overwhelming and coming in at such fast pace. But I want to finish because I have to run to the next meeting in a couple of minutes. But I really want to say that the migraine is trying to protect you. Don't be mad at the migraine, because it's really here to warn you that something is wrong in your brain, that you don't have enough energy or your oxidative stress levels are too high. It's not against you. It's there to serve you. And that's something that is super important, accepting it and not fighting it, but kind of trying to thank it for what it does. And if you fix the source of the problem, if you turn your environment into something that is migraine genetic friendly, migraine genes can even come in at an advantage, right? It's a hyperexcitable brain that is usually perfectionists, right? Or oftentimes perfectionists that have a very high functioning brain, but that are just running out of energy all the time. So a bit like a Ferrari with a tiny engine. So if you replace the engine, your migraine brain can be an advantage again. And so don't give up. This can be fixed. There is hope. And and it really, there's no way that migraine is just an accident of evolution. If 15%, 1 in 7 of us has migraine, it really has to have had an evolutionary advantage. And we just need to make it an advantage again in the current modern world. And that's the aim of the book and the company and my social media, basically.
I think that's a good point to end on. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the book. I've heard a lot about it in recent weeks, and yeah, I'd be excited.
Yeah, we're currently experimenting with the covers, and that's fun. I like the design parts of things.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for your time.
Thank
What are the best places to find you so that people can find out more information?
Yeah, so it's probably, like I said, Instagram. We now have Instagram. That's only new, but Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. It's Dr. Elena Gross everywhere. And you can also find Brain Ritual on most social media channels and KetoSwiss. Okay. So find me there, ask me questions. I can make more videos, and I really hope you get your migraines fixed. And Andrew, amazing to talk to you as always.
It's great to talk to you.
And yeah, until next time.